If you've been wondering why your grocery bill is higher, why small businesses are struggling, and why politicians keep dodging the simplest questions, this exchange tells you everything you need to know.
Chair recognizes Vice Chair Murray.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing today. I want to thank both the chair and the ranking member. I know when it comes to trade and tariffs, this committee has strong bipartisan concerns, so I'm glad that we have the opportunity to hear directly from you today, Ambassador Greer. President Trump promised to lower costs on day one. Instead, he did slap these unprecedented new taxes on nearly everything that Americans buy from abroad. And now that prices are rising, he's calling affordability a Democratic scam. Well, Ambassador, let me just ask you, yes or no, do tariffs raise prices for American consumers?
I don't think they do. When you look at all the data, I think they have a very limited impact.
Well, I disagree, and Secretary Bessent said on Fox News that exempting products from tariffs would, quote, bring the prices down very quickly. Wouldn't that mean then that tariffs increase prices?
I think, again, the general answer is no. I think with some of those products he was referencing, bananas, coffee, things we don't necessarily make, there you're going to get more of a chance of a price impact from tariffs. Other stuff that we make or have a lot of producers, you don't have the flow through. But I think with those, you could see an impact. So.
Well, I think my consumers, the people in my state, are seeing price increases, and they know what's happening. I don't see how anybody with a straight face can't say that tariffs raise prices, but somehow ending them lowers the prices. So I think we all need to be honest. Now, in April, I visited a local candy company in my home state in Tacoma, Washington. They're called Brown and Haley. They have been in business for 112 years, and they employ 150 people. They are known for almond roca, which they export to 65 countries in the world. Brown and Haley told me that Trump's tariffs and trade wars have cost them half of their export business, half. They worked hard for years to become a net exporter to China. And then Trump's trade war came along and their China exports dropped to zero. Now, to keep their business alive in China, they have been forced to license their brand to other products made in China and literally helping Chinese manufacturers at the expense of the American ones. You're their trade representative. What have you done to ensure that American small businesses who rely on sales to China are able to sell their products and grow the economy here at home?
So a couple things. First of all, we're opening market access all over the world in places like Southeast Asia and even in Europe, places where everyone thinks we've had market access for a long time, but we haven't. So we're opening billions and billions of dollars of markets. I'd be interested in talking to the company that makes almond roca. I think that's that is news to me that they had an issue in China.
Well, they're one of many in my home state and actually in this country who are facing the same kind of thing. In fact, we have farmers and growers who are trying to expand into other markets, as you well know, and they're being thrown one-time limited relief. But our small businesses and our farmers want to trade. They don't want aid, and they tell me that this is really creating chaos, including Brown and Haley, but other companies as well. And I'd love to have you take a look at that because it has had a serious impact to them. Now, I do understand tariffs can be strategic, but there seems to be no strategy to me when it comes to this trade war. And coffee is a great example. We consume nearly 800 times as much coffee as we produce, as you know. I doubt that's going to change anytime soon. And I'm glad that coffee is now exempt from some of these tariffs. But I cannot understand why this administration forced Americans to pay higher for months. Tell me, what did the coffee tariffs actually achieve?
So, first of all, coffee prices were going up for 2 years. I can't affect the weather in Brazil and these other places. Second of all the tariffs that were imposed, some of them are in place to protect domestic supply chains. Some of them are in place for leverage. So in early September, the president announced that he was going to take the tariffs off of coffee and bananas and other things. And then once we had the deals with the kind of countries that send us coffee and bananas, Ecuador, Vietnam, Indonesia, et cetera, then we had used that leverage and we removed it.
Why did it take so long to exempt coffee?
Well, because TPP was negotiated for 8 years under Obama, and it never came to fruition. We did deals with Southeast Asia in 6 months to get all the tariffs down. So I think that's really, really fast.
Well, my opinion is those kinds of issues should have been worked out before we slap tariffs on anybody. But let me say this, and I just have a few seconds left. Canada is Washington State, my state's second largest export partner and our largest source of international visitors. And I want you to know this. President Trump's trade war and insults have driven away Canadian visitors to my state and to other states. it has delivered a huge blow to our economy. Passenger vehicle border crossings in my state are down more than 24% in the first 10 months of this year. Spokane, Washington, Eastern Washington, saw a 33% drop in visitors this year. The operator of a ferry between Seattle and Victoria, BC, has been forced to lay off now a quarter of its workforce because ridership is down 30%. In my state, Americans are losing their jobs and our businesses are struggling. And I just really believe, Mr. Ambassador, we should not be picking fights with our close allies and neighbors like Canada. This trade war has been a terrible blow to American small businesses, and I hope it ends. It has to end. If it could end tomorrow, it would be so much better for my state and so many other people. And I want you to know that, especially with Canada, this is hurting my state.
Because today, a United States senator asked a yes or no question that affects every American household. Do tariffs raise prices? And instead of a straight answer, we got a masterclass in denial. Senator Patty Murray came into this hearing representing families, workers, farmers, and small business owners who are already feeling the squeeze. And she cut straight through the noise. President Trump promised lower costs on day one. Instead, his administration imposed sweeping tariffs, essentially new taxes on goods Americans buy every day. When prices started going up, the response wasn't accountability, it was deflection. Calling affordability concerns a Democratic scam doesn't make rent cheaper, groceries cheaper, or childcare cheaper. It just avoids responsibility. So Senator Murray asked the obvious question: do tariffs raise prices for American consumers? The trade representative said no, not once, but repeatedly, and that answer matters because it ignores something every economist outside of partisan politics agrees on. Tariffs are paid by importers, and those costs are overwhelmingly passed down to consumers. Not in theory, in practice. You saw the contradiction unfold in real time. On one hand, the administration insists tariffs don't raise prices. On the other hand, they admit that removing tariffs on products like coffee and bananas would bring prices down quickly. Those two statements cannot both be true. If ending tariffs lowers prices, then tariffs raise them in the first place. That's not ideology, that's basic economics. But Senator Murray didn't stop at theory. She brought the conversation back to people, real businesses, real workers, real communities. She talked about Brown and Haley, a family-run candy company in Washington state that's been operating for more than a century, a company that employs 150 Americans, a company that built its business by exporting almond roca to over 60 countries. Trump's trade war wiped out half of their export business. Half! Their exports to China dropped to zero, and to survive, they were forced into the absurd position of licensing their brand to Chinese manufacturers, helping overseas competitors because American trade policy left them no other choice. That's not protecting American industry, that's undermining it. And when the trade representative said this was news to him, that told viewers something important. These aren't isolated cases, they're warnings that aren't being heard at the top. Small businesses don't want bailout checks or temporary aid. They want stable rules, open markets, and the ability to plan for the future. Chaos is not a strategy. Senator Murray also explained something the administration keeps glossing over. Not all tariffs are created equal. Strategic tariffs can make sense when they're targeted, coordinated with allies, and tied to a clear goal. What Americans are seeing instead is whiplash. Tariffs slapped on first, exemptions negotiated later, and families paying more in the meantime. Take coffee. The United States consumes hundreds of times more coffee than it produces. Tariffs didn't protect American farmers, they just raised prices. Eventually, the tariffs were lifted after deals were made, but not before Americans paid more for months for something we simply don't produce at scale. That's not leverage, that's unnecessary pain. And then there's Canada, a close ally, a major trading partner, a country that sends millions of visitors to U.S. communities every year. In Washington state, Canadian tourism isn't abstract. It supports jobs, ferries, hotels, restaurants, and border towns. Trump's trade war and rhetoric drove those visitors away. Border crossings dropped by nearly a quarter. Some regions saw a 1/3 collapse in visitors. A ferry service between Seattle and Victoria had to lay off a quarter of its workforce. These aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. These are families losing paychecks because we decided to pick fights with neighbors instead of building partnerships. What Senator Murray made clear is this: trade policy isn't about winning arguments on cable news. It's about whether families can afford the basics, whether businesses can plan ahead, whether farmers know who will buy their crops next season, whether communities thrive or fall behind. Tariffs that raise prices, stall exports, and alienate allies aren't tough. They're reckless. And refusing to admit their impact doesn't make the harm go away. This is why these hearings matter. This is why accountability matters. And this is why voters need to pay attention when leaders deny what people are experiencing every day. If you care about lowering costs, protecting small businesses, and rebuilding an economy that works for everyone, not just the loudest voices, stay informed. Share this conversation. Support leaders who are willing to tell the truth even when it's inconvenient, and demand trade policies that help American families instead of hurting them.